everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. There's something about the other side that fascinates most of us, either because we believe something else exists in some fashion, or the idea of other is simply intriguing. Who doesn't want to at least explore the idea of something more? And sure, at times that means being in otherwise terrifying situations. But other times, it's something soft or kind. Whether it be from personal experience or just hearing stories like the ones on tonight's episode, I find it incredibly hard not to believe. And I think at least some of you will agree. So, let's get started, shall we? I'm a full-time firefighter, paramedic. Been on the job for 17 plus years. I've never experienced anything like this before, or since. I want to start by saying I'm a rational adult. I believe in scientific, rational explanations for things. But for this, I got nothing. A few years back, we responded to a call around 3 or 4 a.m. for an elderly man with chest pain. On scene, we found a 96-year-old man complaining of crushing substernal chest pain. It had started around 9 p.m. Tough old guy said, "I figured, hell, I'll sleep it off." Of course, it got progressively worse throughout the night, so his wife got sick of him complaining and made him call 911. Layout of the house was typical for a single-story ranch. Front door into living room. Hallway to the right leads to the bedroom that we were in with the patient. To the left leads to the kitchen, dining room, with a door attached to the garage. I was in the bedroom with another medic. Our third guy was sitting at the kitchen table, putting the patient's info into the computer for the run report. As we started treating the man, he went into cardiac arrest and we immediately began CPR. While heading back out to the truck to get supplies, I yelled to our other medic in the kitchen to get into the bedroom and help out. We shocked the man. To everyone's surprise, we immediately got our rhythm back. As we were loading the patient for transport, I asked the wife, who was also a century old in her nightgown, if she wanted to ride with us to the hospital so she could be with her husband. She was obviously in shock from everything going on and seemed hesitant to leave the house not dressed, but we needed to move with purpose. We asked if their children lived close by, if she could get a ride, as we needed to transport right now. She said, "No, our daughter lives in another state." Suddenly, our third guy, the one getting the patient's info in the kitchen, says, "Well, can your son drive you?" To which she responds, "We only have a daughter." This confused my partner, but there was no time for further discussion, and we brought the man to the ER. Believe it or not, he survived after coding a total of 11 times. After the call, myself and the other medic looked at our partner and asked what was all that about at the house regarding him referring to their son. He told me right before I went to get him from the kitchen, a middle-aged man walked right by him. He said that he looked just like the old man, but he had dark brown hair, and he thought it must have been their son. He was also wearing white t-shirt and blue pajama pants, seemed half asleep when he walked by. He figured that he came out of his bedroom, that all the commotion had woke him up or something. He says the man didn't acknowledge him. He yawned and sort of bumped into the kitchen cabinet before opening the door to the garage and going out into it. He never turned the light on, simply turned back around, closed the door, and walked past him, and turned the corner to the hallway. Apparently, that was when I came around the corner to yell at him to get in there and help. Our partner said, "You had to have practically bumped right into him in the hall." There was nobody else in that house. I saw no one. It was just the elderly couple that lived there. Here's the part that bothers me the most. The old man, our patient, he was wearing the white t-shirt and blue pajama pants. So, what the fuck did our partner see? Was it our patient's ghost, spirit, or whatever? Too freaking weird to wrap my brain around. None of us could ever explain it. And our partner still doesn't like to talk about it, even years later. My wife is a sensitive. She's not a medium, but she's super in tune with the energy around her. Her brother is also a sensitive. And then there's me, a skeptic who just didn't really believe. Well then, the first time I met my brother-in-law was when he was out of prison and he came to stay with us. When he was in the penitentiary, he started to dabble in some dark stuff. As I said, I was a skeptic, so I didn't pay him any mind. Well, apparently, when he moved in, he opened some kind of portal. My wife started noticing strange activity around the house, but I just kept brushing it off. Then one day, my 3-year-old daughter started talking to me about a dead bandit standing at the end of her bed. Once again, I brushed it off, until a few days later, as my wife and I were folding laundry, something caught my eye. It was a sock, just hovering out of the corner of my eye. But when I turned to see if what I was seeing was right, the sock just fell. My wife and I were the only ones home. About a week or so passes, and my wife and I are outside smoking at night, while our son is staring off into the dark and asking us if his friend can come in. He says he needs permission to come in. Those were his words, exactly. I said no. My wife started praying out loud and then called my in-laws, who were both preachers from the deep south, asking them to come over to bless the house, to seal the doorways. That night, my brother-in-law vomited up this crazy-looking stuff. It wouldn't come up out of the carpet. He ended up moving out a month later, but that spot on the carpet, it never really dried up, and it wouldn't come up. Anyway, after this and many more experiences that happened, you could say I'm not a skeptic anymore. When I was 11, my family moved to a very rural area of Minnesota in 1999 after living in a city in Wisconsin. We were surrounded by cornfields, and it was about 45 minutes to any larger town or city. I just want to set the scene a little, because as a kid who was used to the city, it definitely added to the creepy factor at night. What made it even worse at night for me was that a lot of times I was left alone. My mom was a night shift nurse and my dad was a truck driver. I'd leave the TV on, playing Nick at Night, so I could fool myself into thinking my mom was in the living room watching shows. I'd also sleep in their room because it brought me comfort and was closer to the TV. Some may disapprove of this, but at the time, there wasn't much to do about it. My parents needed to make money, and this was what they chose to do. Anyway, it was like this often, but one weekend my dad was home, which didn't happen often. So this meant I was in my room, which was right near the front door, and my dad was in their bedroom, toward the back of the house. We had a Springer Spaniel who was my best friend and who slept with me often. One night that weekend, I woke up to him not at my side. I could hear what sounded like a dog, my dog, growling and whimpering. I got up, walked to the kitchen, right outside my room, and looked toward the front door. In the entryway, I saw the head of a man bent down near my dog, and I said, "Hello?" Not sure what the hell I was thinking as a young girl. I should have ran to my dad, but I was worried about my dog, I guess. He stood up, looking startled. I don't remember what he looked like very well, but he was probably in his 40s or 50s, short, and looked a little disheveled. He asked me where a nearby town was, and I told him I didn't know, but I could go get my dad. The man had taken a few steps forward. My dog growled. He then said that he would figure it out and walked out the door. I ran to get my dad. Needless to say, my dad was really upset I didn't come get him right away. The man never came back that I know of. I don't know if he knew I was usually home alone somehow, and that's why he tried to come in. Or if maybe he was drunk and entered the wrong house, thinking it was his. It was definitely pure luck that this strange guy tried to get into my house on a weekend my dad was home. I know for sure that my dog may have saved me from something awful happening. I still wonder what he was bent down trying to do to my dog to make him whimper like that. I also wonder what would have happened had I not heard my dog. Anyway, that's the story. It was definitely creepy for me. So, this is a personal one for me. I have Ring cameras in my house. At the time, I was in my old house. It was basically a doggy camera to make sure my dogs were okay while I was at work. I'd always catch paranormal stuff on it. At one point, it happened so often, it wasn't exciting. Fast forward to one night. I'm asleep. My dog, Chihuahua, is sleeping on top of the blankets. In this video, there's a voice that is identical to my mom's voice, who passed away a year prior to this happening. It's her voice saying my dog's name, and as it said, my dog's head shoots up and she stretches. The voice even says the nickname of my puppy in the exact same way that my mom did. So I first was extremely happy and enlightened almost. I didn't have any fear because it's my mom, right? Shortly after this, my mom's urn went flying across the table and onto the floor while my boyfriend and I were watching a movie. This scared me to no end. I lost my breath halfway up the stairs, and I collapsed, hysterically crying. My mom wouldn't do this to me. So I'm wondering if that voice was something trying to get me to interact with it, because I'm irritable and sensitive to things like that. I just want some opinions. Also, please don't ask for the video. I won't be posting it. It's extremely personal to me. I don't feel like it's something that needs to be heard or seen by thousands of people, as I love and miss my mom dearly. My grandfather told me this story about how one time he was sitting in a chair in front of the house when he heard his wife repeatedly calling for him from inside the house. The thing is, my grandmother had passed away a few years before that. But he told me that the voice was so pressing that he got up to go look inside the house. And as soon as he got inside, he heard a loud crash behind him. He turned around to see that the chair he'd been sitting on moments ago had been crushed by a cast iron gutter that fell on it. If he hadn't come inside the house, he would have probably been seriously injured. I don't know if it's paranormal or not, but every time I think about it, it sends chills down my spine. I don't even know where to begin with this story. It all just seems too surreal for me and my 3 friends. Since this incident happened 4 years ago, no one's really spoken about it. In fact, what happened on the island of Hawaii actually is the one incident that almost broke our friendship. My name is Tom. I'm 25 years old and I love the outdoors. In fact, I love the outdoors so much I started a club in high school called the Outdoor Grizzlies. It was a very small group of us who would set up different hiking trips to go on. We had hiked all the way from the beautiful Sleeping Giant State Park trails of Connecticut to Julia Pfeiffer Burns State Park in California, which has a fantastic 80-foot waterfall. In this group of my fellow friends are my best friend since middle school, Jake, my good friend who I met freshman year of high school, Jennifer, and lastly but not least, Jake's girlfriend since high school, Christine. We were inseparable, and we went on all of our hiking trips together in high school. We held fundraisers with permission from the school. I believe the school saw how much we loved nature so much that we would make a career out of it, so they gladly allowed us to take it a step further, with permission from our parents, of course. We were all in shape for the most part, which is part of the reason why we also loved doing what we did. It freed our minds, gave us clarity, took away our anxiety. Often you hear or have experienced yourself being a teenager riddled with anxiety and depression, walking an uphill of uncertainty. But that wasn't us. We even had a few of our teachers going hiking locally, and they told us how inspired they were, how it helped them with their anxiety and stress as well. After we graduated from high school, things sort of died down with the club. We all kept in touch, but as what happens to most people after high school, life. The only one I really kept in touch with was my best friend Jake. He was still with Christine, but her and I barely spoke because hiking just wasn't in our blood anymore. Jennifer did her own thing and was seeing this college jock named Robert. So we, with the exception of Jake, just drifted. A few years had passed, and one evening in May, I decided it was nice enough to throw a bonfire. Just a few friends. Christine didn't really want to hang around just people she didn't know, so she brought up the idea to invite Jennifer. And through the powers of social media, I made it happen, and Jennifer was actually very happy. She talked about how life had gotten in the way, and that her and Robert had broken up, so the bonfire was just what she needed, so she could play catch-up with all of us, like old times. She told me her number was still the same, and I called her to confirm. And that went easier than I thought. Suddenly, I was filled with happiness and excitement, just like old times. The laughter, the jokes. This was something I wish I'd done sooner. We had the bonfire. It went off without a hitch. It was approximately 1:30 a.m. It was just us after everyone else left. Myself, Jake, Jennifer, and Christine. It was perfect. The cool breeze embraced my neck. The fire kissed my nose, leaving me with goosebumps. Jake mentioned how peaceful and nostalgic this was as he downed the tail end of his beer. The energy around our group was just nice. Jennifer mentioned how I once slipped on the wet rock trying to run away from an unusual bug, which was named the Bug Incident. We all laughed, and Jake said, if only we could relive those days and go back. Christine looked at Jennifer and said, what if we can relive those days, but we don't have to go back to relive them? Christine jolted up from her relaxed state. They both gave each other this look like they telepathically knew what they were talking about, and they both squealed. Jake and I smirked because we knew what was coming next. And without boring you with more details than I already have, basically we planned a trip. We picked a place exotic, different. We all voted on Hawaii. We always wanted to go there, but could never raise that much money to go, given that it was so expensive for a bunch of high schoolers at the time. So we formed a plan. Jake's aunt was a flight attendant. I had a rainy day fund with a generous amount of money. Jennifer saved money for a trip that she was going to take on her own, and Christine had a decent YouTube following for makeup, so she was sure she could crowdfund. After 3 weeks, we combined our finances and were able to afford the trip. We were going to stay around the Honolulu area because there was a very well-known hiking place there with beautiful waterfalls. When we arrived at our destination, boy, were we excited. We decided that we would be tourists for the first 3 days, and the last 3 days we'd spend hiking around the area. We'd use the 7th day for getting ready to leave. We wanted to take it a step further. We wanted to camp out in the area. When the time came, we felt like we were ready. We had all done it before, camping while hiking, and were very well versed in general in both. So we had experience, and we felt like we could take this on. We made our way deeper and deeper into the forest. We saw people along the way. A couple of tourists that we spoke to, a few friendly locals, and then we began to notice how much more isolated it became. Christine had said that we seemed far away, that we didn't have any signal on our phones anymore. She bought a compass and a map, so she said we should just find a place around the area we were in. We all agreed. We found a beautiful place. It was like it was waiting for us. It was on a cliffside, looking over almost the entire island. We didn't realize how far up we'd hiked, but it was relatively safe. There was a fence made of bamboo, so you really couldn't fall unless you purposely threw yourself over the fence. But even then, there was a big enough rock protruding out, so you couldn't fall too far and die, basically. It really was the most magnificent view I'd ever seen. We set up one of the tents, and then we had set up some lanterns around, and we made a fire to keep away the insects. Jennifer decided to go with Christine to explore around while Jake and I were setting up. Eventually, Christine yelled, "Hey!" Then we heard her clearing some brush, and she said, "Stairs?" I thought she was just imagining it or joking, and she said, "No, guys, come on, look." They looked pretty worn, but they led to that piece of the rock at the bottom. To put it into better perspective for you, the reader, picture Pride Rock from The Lion King. We were standing on that flat piece, and then imagine another flat piece on the bottom of that, but with stairs that wrapped around to let you get to the bottom. Jennifer was against going down the worn steps because she was afraid someone might get hurt. But we had to know what the stairs led to. What if it was a treasure, an artifact? Jake and I decided to go, and the girls could stay. The stairs in the beginning were made of stone and were worn, but once we got to the middle of the steps, it wasn't as bad. We finally got down and saw that it was a piece of the rock that we were standing on, like on the upper level, minus the forest. It was like a cave. We'd made our way into the cave, and we could hear our footsteps crushing broken coconut shells and sand grit. Jake took his flashlight and lit up the inside. We were amazed. There seemed to be drawings on the walls and what looked like a burial site. It looked disturbed, but the drawings are what made us intrigued. I lit my flashlight and I pointed it to the wall. We were able to make out bodies and very tiny heads. We carefully swept the debris from the wall. We needed more light to understand the carvings, so we called the girls and reluctantly they came. We asked them to point their flashlights at the wall, and then we all did the same at the same time, and they were just as amazed. We took photos and we said at the end of our trip, we'll let the information desk know about this place. Maybe we discovered something that no one else has ever seen. Christine said, "Wait a minute. It seems like these carvings tell a sequence of events from right to left." As we looked at these carvings, we saw what looked like a figure pushing someone off a ledge. We immediately got the chills and collectively decided to head back. Jake broke the silence and said, "Remember, this was thousands of years ago. It was just a part of history." Jennifer replied, "Yeah, but it's just as creepy." We all agreed, though, if it were to rain, we'd seek refuge in the cave. We decided to go look around, not too far from the campsite, but just explore. We were all inspired since we stumbled across that carving on the wall. Maybe we could find something else. We were about 15 minutes into our walk when we realized the sun was beginning to set. Christine brought up the fact that we should probably head back. We don't want to get caught out in the dark. It would make things harder for us. We all decided to head back. As we were heading back, we heard rustling and sticks breaking. Christine grabbed Jake, and Jennifer locked her arm with mine. Jake looked at me in bewilderment and said, "An animal?" And I said, "No. Whatever it is has a heavy foot. Familiar footing." Jake had a military-grade knife, and he had his hand on it. Jennifer had her mace. The branches were sounding louder and louder. We froze. We braced ourselves on the defense, just in case. Suddenly, the big leaves parted, and a man who looked like a native Hawaiian, had a straw hat and one of those touristy-looking Hawaiian shirts. He emerged from the bushes. He said in a stern voice,
"Why are you in these parts?"
We explained that we were hikers from the mainland, and that we have a campsite not too far from here, on a rock. We also mentioned the strange markings we saw on the cave walls. After we'd said that, his eyes widened, and we all agreed that it felt like they pierced our souls. And he said,
"I'm going to give you advice from one human being to another."
We just stood there, wide-eyed, with nothing to say, listening intently, waiting for what he would tell us. He said,
"You should not sleep there. You should pack up your things and leave. Many bad things happened in this area for millennia since the golden age has been broken. a curse that's been cast on this sacred land, and it would be foolish for you to stay here.
Jennifer said with a knot in her throat. Why? The man said,
The night marchers. Oh, approaches. Get somewhere safe. And whatever you do, don't look them in the eye.
And then he took off. We all looked at one another, and Jake said, Did we really come all this way to leave? We decided it's only going to be one night, and dusk was already approaching. As soon as the morning comes, we'll pack up and leave. We just won't touch anything. So we made our way back to the campsite. When we finally got back, Jennifer remembered she'd brought a pot and 2 cans of clam chowder. So we relit the fire, put the pot over the fire, and heated up our food. We enjoyed a decent dinner. It was one of the best nights we had hiking since our high school days. Christine looked at her watch and noticed it was 12:45 a.m. I'll never forget that time, because it was the start of the night from hell. We decided to get ourselves ready to sleep. 2 people could fit in one tent. Since it was beautiful outside, and Jennifer and I admired the stars, we decided to lay out and fall asleep under the stars. I remember thinking to myself, I only see skies like this on the wallpaper for my computer. It was just so magical. I dozed off. I remember waking up to use the bathroom. Of course, there really was no bathroom, so I decided to go into the woods. I remember it was silent. No animals making noise, no insects, nothing. It was eerily quiet outside. It was like time stopped. I quietly walked behind the tent and into some bushes to release. And then I heard a horn. I'm not sure that that's what it was, but it sounded like a horn. I just passed it off as me hallucinating. I headed back to sleep. As I was drifting back off, suddenly I heard what sounded like a drum. My finger tapped the ground with each beat of the drum. It began to get louder and louder. Jake woke up and peeked outside the tent, and he looked at me and said, "How do you have service up here to watch a movie? Turn it down, man." I said, "Jake, that's not me." Now, if you knew Jake, you'd know that he only uses my full name when he's really serious with me. And he said, "Thomas, stop joking and go to bed. You know we have to get up early and leave." He rubbed his eyes and looked at his Apple Watch. And then, just as suddenly as all the others, a horn noise went off again, and it was even louder. Jennifer sat up and said, "Okay, the prank isn't funny. Not cool." Immediately, it sounded louder, and the drum was getting closer and closer. Christine was fast asleep in the tent. Just when we thought we were cornered, it went silent. All you could hear were our own heartbeats. We were frozen, looking at one another. I gave Jake a look like we had a plan, and we nodded at one another like we knew what to do. Jake slowly went back into the tent, and you could hear him whisper, "Christine, Christine," followed by a soft, "Yeah? Is it time to get up?" I looked at Jennifer, and she was in what seemed like a daze. I motioned to her to grab her bag, but she wasn't moving. She looked like she was moving her mouth, but nothing was coming out. I broke out of my fright, and I went up to her and I said, "What's wrong? We have to go." She lifted her shaking arm and half pointed behind me, and I grabbed her arm and said, "What?" in an angry whisper, and she said, "Behind." My breath shook, and I slowly turned. Behind me, I can hear Jake getting things together in the tent, and as I turned around, this was the part that scared me to my core. My fight or flight kicked in, and I barely remember anything else. I saw a tall man, at least 6 feet tall, with a machete, but that's not what scared me. It was his head. It was very small. He had what looked like a coconut shell for armor, with eyes cut out for holes, and a small hole for the mouth. His body looked normal, but his head, the size of a coconut. Jennifer screamed. Christine and Jake came out and froze in fear. I immediately pushed Jennifer away from looking at this monster, this thing. She snapped out of it, got up, grabbed me, and ran. Jake and Christine followed. We didn't know where we were going or which direction. We just ran. We left everything. We heard footsteps, branches breaking, as if there were like 10 of them following, just cutting down the branches like nothing. I don't know how we got through the forest, but Christine noticed a strong river of water, and we figured we could lose them if we crossed it. We all jumped in, started making our way through, but it just kept getting deeper. Before we knew it, the river overpowered us. As it carried us, I looked back and I saw 5 of those beings with various weapons in their hands. They stopped following us. They just stared at us. I kept looking, and I'll never forget seeing these people. Being of average height, with small heads. I don't know, but I passed out. I woke up to the sun on my face and Christine hitting my face. She'd had a gash on her head, and Jake and the rest of us, we all had scratches and bruises all over our bodies. Before we could even talk, we heard a helicopter over us. They came and airlifted all of us to the island nursing triage to get us checked out. I asked the guy, "How did you find us?" He said that an individual's Apple Watch sent them coordinates at 4:55 a.m. They'd been looking for us for about 4 hours because it wasn't easy to get to where we were. Christine just cried and Jennifer hugged her. Jake and I looked at one another. The guy added that we shouldn't have been where we were and that we were way off the path. Local authorities came to speak to us and ask us what happened. I told them everything, from the drawings to the strange men with small heads. Officers went on to explain that that's just folklore. But then he continues, saying that people get so frightened of the night marchers that they end their life because their minds can't take what they've seen. He goes on to say that they've only had 2 instances of documented suicides. One was a 19-year-old girl who jumped off the rock cliff we were camping at. And the other person, they called off the search because authorities refused to search when night approaches. The area was closed off to the public when they found 4 headless bodies in the 1980s. And the perpetrator was never found. He continued that we must have been way off the trail to be by that rock area because it's completely closed off. They seemed really puzzled how we even got there to begin with. As I had chills run down my spine, I wondered, did we actually go into the river to escape, or did we try to end our lives? And what was under the coconut shell? Was there even a head at all? But how could they breathe or see? I asked the officer taking our statement, "Do the night marchers have heads?" And he said, "According to folklore, since you're alive to tell the tale, they didn't remove their coconut shell. But had you died and jumped off the cliff, you, like the young girl who did, would have known the answer for yourself." We decided to take a very long break from hiking or camping. Instead, we would just meet at the bar. And though I can't help but wonder what a head the size of a coconut looks like, no one really wants to talk about it. Well, friends, that's all the stories we have for tonight's episode. But be sure to join me every Friday night for a brand new one. I want to thank those who shared their stories, and a big thanks to all of you for listening. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to The Darkest Hour, and tap the bell so you never miss a thing. Also, leave a comment. I love hearing from you. Huge shout out to all my patrons for their unwavering support. MISANTHROPIA, Shane Q, Monica L, The Dark Cosmos, ZOEWATT, Shelly B, Donald C, Rat Girl, Alicia S, and Aaron G. If you want to support The Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour. You can keep up with me and all things Darkest Hour over on my Instagram @thedarkesthouryt, and follow me on Twitter @AmandaJaneTDH. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me. amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.